Hello, Adab, Namaste. Welcome to Chit Chat with Manoj. I am Manoj Singh. Today we have a very interesting topic of discussion: digital nomading. Digital nomading has been around for few years, ever since we had a good internet connectivity. But with pandemic and lockdowns, it has become very popular. Millennials are loving it because they are computer savvy, love to travel, and in certain sectors, one does not need a fixed office or a home space to be productive. Let me introduce to you tonight our guest, Nora Dunn. Nora and I met during an Amtrak journey in the Pacific Northeast, but she traveled the whole United States. She was on a whirlwind train excursion around the US. She has a blog about it. She even wrote a book about it, and we are going to talk about it. Nora has traveled full time for 12 years and around 60 countries. She even had lived in India for a few months and have written books, writes blogs, and gives courses. Here is Nora.
Manoj, what a pleasure to be here with you tonight. Thank you.
Yes, Nora, thank you so much for taking the time. And it's such a interesting and discussion today on digital nomading. So first question to you, what's your longitude and latitude today? Where are you?
To be perfectly honest, I'm not sure what my exact longitude and latitude is, but I am in Toronto, Canada, which is
Okay.
actually my hometown. I was born and raised here. And when I left Toronto to travel full time back in 2007, I never thought that I would come back here, but the universe conspired, and I've had a place here for the last 3 years. After traveling full time for 12 years, I decided to get an apartment here, and now I travel long term. I travel for weeks, months at a time, whenever I want. And you caught me on my first post pandemic trip.
Yeah, I know it. We had such a nice, interesting discussion. So I am also actually away in Nags Head, North Carolina. We are here for a family reunion for Thanksgiving, and let's how my first question will be about how did it all start? The thought, the shift of mindset to travel around and work. Tell us a little bit about your when it came to you that this is what I want to do, and and you've done it successfully, and you look happy, and let's talk about it.
All right, sounds like a plan. The process for me to become a digital nomad was was organic, in
Mhm.
that words like digital nomad and location independent and remote work even did not exist when this crazy idea was hatched in my mind. It was 2006. I realized that I was working as a financial planner. I was helping people engineer their finances so they could design the lives and live the lives that they really wanted to and satisfy their goals, whether it be, trips or buying properties or planning for retirement, or I helped one client move to Australia. I helped another one become a rock star. It was all, for me, it was all about helping people realize their dreams and design their lives. And suddenly I realized, hey, wait a minute, what about mine? What about my life? And I had a lifelong dream of traveling the world in a really culturally immersive way, and breaking bread around dinner tables around the world and seeing how the children play and what do people talk about, and how do you shop and what do you eat, and volunteering and climbing mountains. And I realized that I couldn't do that with vacations. I tried. I really tried. I didn't get anywhere. Every time I came home from a vacation, I had more questions than answers. So I realized if I really wanted to do this, I had to do it sooner than later, and I had to make it a lifestyle. So I sold everything, sold the financial planning practice and everything I owned in Toronto, uh, with nothing more than a plan to just start traveling. I didn't even know how I would make money at the time. But I figured it out along the way. So it wasn't long into my travels that the light bulb went off in my head, and I thought, hey, wait a minute. With a laptop and an internet connection, I could make a living online as a writer, because I had always been a writer. I'd always had a penchant for the written word. So my initial remote career ambitions were as a freelance writer. And I wrote for financial publications. As a former financial planner, of course, I could write for financial publications about travel, and I would write for travel publications about finance, because the two are very interrelated topics. I was also one of the original travel bloggers, but travel blogs in 2006 didn't exist. They were just really online journals. So I never had any idea that travel blogging would ever become a career or something that you could monetize. But here we are, 15 years later, and I have certainly developed a very successful career as a freelance writer on the topics of travel and personal finance. And I'm considered one of the original travel bloggers with a website called theprofessionalhobo.com, where I teach people how to travel long term and work remotely in a financially sustainable way.
Mm, nice, nice. So, because I've been lately becoming more interested. First, I met you, then I also saw some other sort of channels. I saw some programming about this youth or the young millennials coming out of Ivy League schools. And one of the examples I saw was he traveled to Vietnam, and he, in fact, was working from there, and he started some classes there, and that's why he got settled. And in fact, even found a girlfriend over there, a local girl. And suddenly he's talked about his colleagues, his friends were doing the same thing, and it was so. But when I mention in my circle, which is, of course, lived sort of a structured life, when I mention nomading, they wonder how can person live out of a suitcase or two, and that is their world, and continuously travel but remain focused and productive. The myths, I mean, what happens is, from childhood you're brought up in a such and structured way by your parents and your friends, and you see, okay, now you get married, now you have a house, now you get children, and so let's talk about it. I mean, the myths, the myths about digital nomading.
All right, absolutely. And I think that there are, I mean, we entitled this talk The Three Top Myths About the Digital Nomad Lifestyle. But really, as I was writing this out, I thought, oh, geez, I should have chosen four, no, five, no, six, no, seven. There are so many misconceptions about what it is to be a digital nomad. But one of the first misconceptions is that it's a job. Being a digital nomad, like I regularly, people will write in to me and say, hey, Nora, I love what you're doing. I want to become a digital nomad. How do I find that job? There is no job entitled digital nomad. Being a digital nomad is a lifestyle. Your work can be anything that allows you to work online, anything that is considered location independent, in that you don't have to be in a specific place in order to do your work. As long as you don't need to be in a specific place to do your work, then you can take your work anywhere in the world. Now, the purist, there are now a couple of different definitions of digital nomad. The purist definition, as in the very first original definition, was a digital nomad was someone who was proverbially homeless. So you were completely nomadic, you travel full time without a home, and make a home wherever you are in the world at that time, and you work online. These days, that is, the digital nomad definition has become much broader. A lot of people will refer to digital nomads as someone who, they could have a home and a home base, but if they travel with their remote work, then they could call themselves a digital nomad. So I'm an example now. I would never previously have called myself the digital nomad because I have an apartment. But now, apparently, even though I have a home base, because I do travel for up to 6 months of the year, I can still be called a digital nomad. So, but the first and foremost is very important to debunk the myth that it is a job. It's not a job, it's a lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Um, so let's see. Let's talk about some other things. What's the second myth and the third myth?
All right. Well, the second myth, I'm going to ask you, because the second myth is a double-edged sword. It's two different opposites. So, Manoj, what do you think is the cost of the digital nomad lifestyle? Do you think it's
Very hard.
really expensive, or do you think it's only for like people who live on $5 a day?
Um, It's very hard to guess. Depends on what's your lifestyle is, and where are you living? What do you prefer? What are your sort of eating habits? So many. I mean, your variations. So for me, it is hard to pinpoint that this is the right number. Do you have a way to? I mean, I know you've written a book on how to stay for free, and you have so a lot of good travel tips, and a lot of them I don't know because I have traveled quite a bit as a tourist. I have worked remotely in a lot of countries as an expat in Indonesia, Hong Kong, Luxembourg, several countries, and that's also. And my team used to be virtual actually. I had a few members in Europe, few members in England, and few in India because most of the code was being done in India, and we would deliver and package together and do testing and then execution and all that. So you tell us about it. I mean, for me it will be hard, but I think it depends on the lifestyle. You can be on a low budget if you maintain a certain type of low profile, but then of course you can even have a higher budget if you like luxuries and all that, even in travel.
Well, you have some experience, Manoj, in the remote work, and you have lived and worked around the world. So it was you knew too much to answer that question properly. But most
Okay.
people most people will automatically say it's too expensive. That traveling full time would be too expensive.
Mhm.
But you took the other, but the other answer though is that people often think that the only people who are digital nomads are backpackers or the people who are traveling on almost nothing. Like I wrote a book, indeed, on how to get
Mhm.
free accommodation around the world. Because I did find actually in my initial years of traveling full time that it costs a lot less than I ever expected it to cost. And I will talk about that in a minute.
Mhm.
But it's so funny because, I wrote a book, How to Get Free Accommodation Around the World. And people then assume that I was staying in cardboard shacks at the side of the road instead of in multi-million dollar mansions and beautiful resort properties and the sorts of places I was staying. People, there is a stereotype about digital nomads that thankfully is starting to go away. But there's this stereotype that digital nomads are these basically white American dudes who are living in Southeast Asia on $5 a day. And that's just not the case anymore. Perhaps it was in the beginning, in the early days. Perhaps those are the people who were defining the digital nomad revolution. But we're in a completely different world now of what it is to be a digital nomad because the pandemic has now made all these jobs remote and created this huge opportunity for people to start to live and work from anywhere in the world that they wish. Which brings me to the usual, what most people say about the cost of the digital nomad lifestyle is they usually say, "Oh, it's too expensive. I couldn't possibly afford that." And I understand where people are coming from because if you think of a vacation, you've got time, you're not working. So you've got this time off and you fly somewhere and you stay in a hotel and every single day you're doing tourist activities. Well, if you take the cost of that 1 week vacation and you multiply it times 52 weeks a year, yeah, that's going to be a really expensive lifestyle. But the reality is, because it's a full time lifestyle, because you're working full time, you're not traveling in the same way that you would if you were on vacation.
Mhm.
You're not staying in hotels at 365 nights a year. You're usually renting apartments or staying in co-living spaces or finding forms of accommodation that give you a sense of home. For me, I did a lot of house sitting, so that was why I got to stay for free, but I got to stay in well-appointed homes with nice office spaces and kitchens and plants. So I wasn't eating at restaurants all the time. I also wasn't doing tourist activities all the time because think about your life when you're at home and you work full time, right? Do you go out and do touristy things every day? No. In fact, actually, most people don't even know what their hometowns offer to travelers because they don't even have the time or even the effort to explore their own backyards. Because when we travel, we want to travel away from home. So we don't even know what our own homes can offer. Why? Because you're working. You work all day, and then in the evenings you're doing the tasks of life. You're shopping and you're cooking and you're, watching Netflix. And maybe on the weekends, one or two nights a week, you'll do something that is extracurricular. So if you take that lifestyle and you put it on the road, that means that you're going to be discovering a place in a more leisurely way. You're going to be experiencing life in a daily living in the place that you're living in. But then also too, you're also, you'll only do touristy things maybe a couple of days a week, tops, And so it's a more leisurely pace of life. And because of that, it is not as expensive as people might think it is. In fact, for me, I really surprised myself because I realized in my first couple of years of traveling full time, I tracked all of my expenses and my income. And I realized it cost me way less to travel full time than it did for me to have a home base. That when I was living in Toronto, it actually cost me less to travel full time than it did to live in one place.
I
Now,
mean,
that doesn't
because
always have to be the case.
yeah, either because you're paying, I mean, when you're home, you're paying a mortgage or a rent and taxes
And
and we
insurance
talk
and
about it. So,
cars and
and so many other expenses. And for me as an expat, it was a little bit focused. And like you said, it's work. Although I was in Indonesia, but I had a job to do. I had milestones, I had schedules, and all of that, and I remained focused. In that, my case, there was an office. But one of the questions, I have two-part question. One is when in your beautiful environment, maybe Bali or something, and you're working, how do you focus yourself? I mean, it's, I think it's the deliverable that what the client is asking, you will get paid if you do X, Y, Z and finish it on time or whatever the schedule or the milestones or action items are. So let's talk about how do you as a professional focus in getting to do the work in a new environment every 2 3 weeks or 4 weeks if you're moving.
That's a great question, Manoj. And that is probably, you have just hit on probably what has been my biggest challenge consistently for the last 15 years of living a digital nomad lifestyle is work-life balance, or more appropriately, work-life travel balance. Because like you say, there's this beautiful destination out my window beckoning me to enjoy it. And yet here I am having to work. And a colleague of mine said it very well when he said, you can work and you can travel, but you cannot do the two at the same time. You're going to do one or the other. And I found that to be true. I felt like I was consistently sacrificing one at the expense of the other because I was trying to do them both at the same time. Now, the other thing that you mentioned in there is you were talking about traveling or moving every 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. And that is the solution to this problem, in that the slower you travel, the better a chance you have of being able to get your work done in a guilt-free way while also discovering your destination. Because it has to happen a lot slower. So even choosing a pace, I mean, everyone will choose a different pace and everyone will change their pace throughout the course of a year or years. But generally speaking, I say as a bare minimum, on average, you will need a month in a destination. And in fact, even that isn't long enough. And I'll demonstrate. Let's
Mhm.
say you want to spend 1 month in each destination. So great, you've chosen your first destination. But in order to even get there, you have to decide where you're going to go. And then you have to find the area you want to stay in. And then you have to find somewhere to stay. And then you have to book the tickets and the transportation there. And then you have to figure out, where the co-working or co-space is or whatever. And then you arrive and then you have to figure out how to survive there. Where do I shop? How do I get my groceries? How do I cook? I mean, this is the tasks of life in a different country present a whole new set of challenges that you may not be accustomed to experiencing. Everything takes longer when you are traveling, when you're in a new culture, in a country where you may not speak the language, experience and learning systems that you're unfamiliar with. So as soon as you've kind of just figured out how to survive at your destination, you've got to pick the next place and get that process going. It's
Yes.
a never ending. So for me, an ideal pace of travel is 3 months in one place. And then that way I can actually relax into being there for a while and not feel that guilt of I have to get this work done, but there's stuff out there I want to see. No, it's okay. I have 3 months here. I've got time to do that and this. So it's very important. And I think also that anyone, Manoj, you mentioned the client deadline, right? So knowing that you're being beholden to a task being done, that's certainly, whether it's a client deadline or an employer who deadline, I think those definitely help. But I think the pandemic has shown us that even with deadlines, remote work requires a huge amount of discipline.
Yes,
It's
I
it's
can
too
see
easy.
so.
Yeah,
And
I
I
mean, when you're
also
working from home, there's all kinds of other distractions. You have to
and
focus.
I agree with you when if I'm in a new country, first thing I have to figure out is how to use the phone, how to connect to the
Right?
internet, what is the cheapest way to transport. I mean, where do I stay? All of that takes time, I mean, to mentally to get settled, and then and then connect and then work and so I touch upon. And so what is interesting is now what I was reading, that a lot of countries are actually encouraging this and have starting to have a new visa program, because visa limitations are also there too. Whether you're a tourist, some give you only 1 month, some 30 days, some 90 days. But now they are going to start they have created the Nomad Cities with high speed internet connectivity. And I was reading some of them popular ones are Colombia, Thailand, and some of the other ones, Bali. And that's very interesting. And that is, the visa program is there for what you just said. You just can't, you take some time to settle and then to be productive.
So these visas came about because of the pandemic. Because companies around the world were forced to either go remote or close down, suddenly there were millions upon millions of people whose jobs had been made remote and whose jobs will remain remote. And countries, even during the pandemic, while lockdowns were still widespread, countries and governments were cluing into this. They said, "Oh, we want remote workers. We want them to come." So they created all these remote work and digital nomad visas. I'll tell you what, though, they're not really looking for digital nomads. Because when I look at the criteria for a lot of these visas, not all of them, but a lot of them, they require you to demonstrate a proof of income that if you're self-employed, it's going to be very difficult. What they're really looking for is a pay stub. They want you to show that you work for an employer and that you have an income of, in some cases, up to 5,000 US dollars a month. And
Hmm.
they want you, in order to even qualify for that visa, you've got to show them that piece of paper. And this is going to be very interesting to see how this plays out in the coming months and years within the digital nomad community, because a lot of digital nomads, there are lots of people who work remotely for employers, but there are also lots who are self-employed. And before the pandemic, for digital nomads, we usually just traveled on tourist visas, because if you're not doing business in the country that you're going to, you don't need a business visa. And you're not doing employment in the country that a local could do, so you don't need a work visa. So the only other visa option really was a tourist visa. And countries should be more than happy, of course, as they're now realizing, they should be falling all over themselves for digital nomads to come in, because of course most of the time we earn money in a foreign currency and we come into the country and we spend that money locally. So yay for everybody. But like you say, some of those restrictions sometimes are around, well, you can only stay for 30 days, or it all depends on the passport you carry and the country that you're visiting. But now, what I'm not sure about going forward, and I'll be interested to see how this plays out, is that I wonder if I go to visit a country that has one of these digital nomad visas, but I didn't apply for the visa, and I try to get in with a tourist visa, are they going to scrutinize me more at immigration? Are there going to be more questions, or will I just be allowed in as a tourist? Are they going to suspect me of being a digital nomad, trying to sneak in on a tourist visa? Because some of these visas are expensive too. You just pay $3,000 to apply for a visa just to
Wow.
get in. And to me, I don't know. I just don't. I want to dispel the myth that digital nomads are all broke backpackers, because they're not. There are lots of people who are digital nomads who make a lot of money, but I feel that some of these new visas that have been introduced are actually restrictive, to the point where I might not want to visit that country if it's going to cost me $3,000 to apply for a visa and I have to demonstrate proof of income, which would be difficult for me to do as a self-employed person because I don't have a pay stub to show them. So
Mm,
I'm
mm.
not sure going forward how that's all going to play out, but I guess we'll all see, won't we?
So the first myth was, of course, the clarification of what a digital nomad is. But there's it's so widespread, and now it's changing. Second was, of course, the budget and what people perceive and what it is. What's the third myth?
And I want to just jump back to the first myth, to the tag on the one thing that I mentioned, that so digital nomad is not a job, it is a lifestyle, but also you do not need to be an Instagram influencer or a travel blogger to be a digital nomad. And I think at this point in the conversation, that's already been well demonstrated. But I wanted to just fully dispel the myth that you have
Mm.
to have an Instagram account or a travel blog to be a digital nomad, because that is, in fact, actually, I tell people, people will often come to me and say that they want to, oh, I want to open up a travel blog so I can get travel experience for free. And I like, don't do it. Don't. You're just setting yourself. It's not how that works. You're
Yeah.
not going to start a travel blog and in 3 months start getting free hotel stays. A travel blog is a very competitive industry now, and there are way better ways to make money. To be perfectly honest, I do well because I'm one of the first. But to anyone who thinks that they can just open up an Instagram account and immediately become an influencer, I think has some nasty surprises. So anyway, I just wanted to say that before I get into the third myth.
Y- Yeah. A lot of writers, I mean, previous to even internet, would travel to a destination which inspired them to write the most beautiful poetries and books we have read.
Yeah.
It was not at home. They were in a particular destination, and they wrote that book or a poetry. So, so let's go. Yeah. So let's go to the third one.
The third important myth about being a digital nomad, or about the digital nomad lifestyle, is that it is only for single people. There are lots of couples and families that are digitally nomadic. You can have children and you can live the digital nomad lifestyle. And I'll give you a few examples. The Dennings, Rachel and Greg Dennings, started traveling full time in, I don't remember when it was exactly, I think 2010. They had 5 children at the time. They now have 6 children.
Mm.
The Pattons are a family who have been traveling full time for 9 years with 3 children. I've also met 2 women who are separate individuals, but both of them are single mothers and they travel with their children. So, and then I've met lots of couples, as well as, of course, single people as well. But I want to dispel the myth that that if you have a family, you can't be a digital nomad, or that if you have the any kind of traditional, no, you can. It sometimes requires choices, right? So if you're going to be traveling full time with your children, then you're going to have to look at their education in a different way. So you will be looking at either homeschooling them or putting them in international schools, staying somewhere long enough that they can be in an international school, or participating in world schooling programs. But there are programs and services available for people, for families who want to travel with their kids. So it is definitely possible, not always easy. But the families that I know who travel with their children generally say that they feel that their children are getting a better education in the world than they ever did in school.
You know what I was just coming to that. I truly believe for my own travel, it's very important to go around the world, and it gives you a totally different perspective and appreciation when you travel at different parts of the world, continents, countries, which are less privileged to privileged. And but I found a lot of commonalities among them. I mean, one thing I saw, I went around Asia and even Europe, was that a middle class person has pretty much the same requirements: a roof on the head, a good and clean food on the table, and good education for the children. And myself, I, just from my own experience, always encourage my children to travel. It is
Mm.
education. It is education. It is first-hand learning about a culture. And I also agree with you of living for a longer time in a place. That way, you can literally ingrain and learn about their minute details about their culture, like the food, the clothing, or the myths, or the or the superstitions, or whatever they believe, and you learn a lot more about them, and you appreciate it. And in return also, of course, you talk to them about the appreciation, or what you've learned and what you're enjoying, and they also like it. Even if you say a sentence or two in their language, there's a connection right away. They have a smile, that you care about them. So I truly believe in your that but I would come back to your third one: traveling with children and family. That's more challenging. And like you said, either you have to decide about homeschooling or getting into international schools. But tell us about, no names or anything, but how did they manage with five or six children? Um,
Your guess is as
I
good as
don't
mine.
know.
I tell you, I wouldn't want to do it, but I don't have any children, so it's hard for me to say.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's interesting. I was having a conversation just the other day. I host a show on YouTube called the Remote Work and Travel Show, where I speak with people who have travel lifestyles and they work remotely. And so this woman that I interviewed, who I'll be featuring in a few months, she and her husband live on a boat with their three boys. So they've got three boys, obviously at different ages and different levels of education. And the first question I asked her is, how do you do this? How
Mm.
do you have, your remote business and your homeschooling three boys? Would you each require a different curriculum, and you got to babysit each of them because I'm sure they're not self-disciplined enough to sit down and concentrate on a computer. And you've got all the tasks of living on a boat. Like, boat maintenance is a full-time job into itself. And the way she did it, the way she and her husband arranged it is, she had the remote business and did the work, and her husband would homeschool the boys in the morning from 8:30 until 1, and that would be their school day. And then he would work on the boat. That was his second full-time job, would be doing the boat maintenance in the afternoon and evening. She also said, though, and she said it worked, but she also said that there's no downtime for them as a family. I mean, they fall into bed at night every night and sleep hard until the next day. So it's a busy life. A lot of digital nomad families that I have spoken to have a similar system or pattern where, maybe one or both parents will wake up really early and get some work done before the children wake up, and then the children wake up, and then usually schooling is the first thing that happens in the course of a day, and they get the kids into that routine of doing their school in the mornings, and then maybe they'll go out and do some activities in the afternoons. And so every family is very different, though. There was the Pattons who I mentioned earlier. I interviewed them on my show, and I said, how do you do it? And she said, we don't have any routines. Our whole family, we do whatever, whenever, however. And she said, I've just become a lot more relaxed about deadlines and what she said. My kids are getting a great education. If they don't finish the math module on the 20th of the month, it's okay. So everybody does it differently, and everybody has a different standard of education for their children. But the reality is, like you said, the world teaches us a lot as well.
Yes, yes. So before we move on to some of the travel fun of it and some tips, what would you like to tell the younger generation, or anyone who wants to have decided now that they are retiring, or they want to take up, a hiatus or gap, some rest time, and just want to do this digital nomading, or be a digital nomad? Any sort of message you have for them?
And I think you're so right to have mentioned that there are a lot of different people. There's people who have just graduated from school who think, you know what, I don't want to go work in an office. I want to try this travel life. And then there's people who maybe are mid-career thinking that, no, I want to take my job on the road, or I want to take a sabbatical or a gap year. And then there's people who are retired or early retirees who say, I want to re-engage the world. I want to try doing something a little bit different. So there's a lot of different ways that people can travel long term. There are also millions and millions of people whose jobs are now remote. And a portion of these people whose jobs are still going to be remote on the other side of the pandemic they want to start traveling. And I've been contacted by a lot of these people. Hey, Nora, I want to sell everything and travel the world like you do. And I generally say to them, great, take a test trip first. Just make sure it's for you. Just don't sell everything yet. Keep your place. You could rent it out. You could do a home exchange. You could get house sitters and take off for a few months with your work and decide whether or not you like that lifestyle of traveling and working abroad. I mean, most people are. Who are we kidding? But wouldn't it be nice to know that you can come back without having burnt any bridges if you decide, oh, no, you know what? I'd actually rather just take vacations and work from home.
Great
So
idea. Great
I
idea.
always say, just take that test trip first. There's no harm, no foul. Just see how you feel. And then that will help you determine what kind of lifestyle you want to leave. Because the other thing, the magic of the digital nomad lifestyle is you could do so many different things. You can travel fast, you can travel slow, you can travel in certain places of the world. You can go highbrow, you could go cheap, you could do house sitting, you can volunteer. There's so many different ways that you can live the digital nomad lifestyle. And none of these ways is a life sentence. You can redefine your life as you wish. This is the beauty of lifestyle design. It's up to you every single day to decide how you want to live your life and where you want to live it and how you want to work. And it's wonderful. And I invite people to consider the possibilities that are endless, really, as to how they want to live their lives.
Yep. So let's talk about where we met. And you even wrote a book now about Amtrak travel, the train travel, I would say. It could be anywhere in the world. We happen to be doing the Amtrak train in US. Tell a little bit about your experience in this recent train trip and what you learned. I don't know much about. I'll definitely get that book and read. And so tell us about it. What was your? I would love to hear it because we did only one sector, and you did the whole thing.
I did the whole thing. Well, just to be clear, the book that I wrote, which is called Tales of Trains, Where the Journey is the Destination, I actually wrote and published in 2013. And that was about some specific train journeys I did all over Australia, as well as Europe and Asia. One of the more extraordinary train stunts I've done was the longest possible overland route you can take is from Lisbon in Portugal to Ho Chi Minh City in the south of Vietnam. It's 25,000 kilometers, and I did this all by train in 30 days. So
Wow.
that's one of the stunts that went into this book that I wrote. And that also, I think, is probably a pretty good precursor to demonstrate I really like trains. Like for me, if I could live on trains, I would be very happy. There's something magical for me about train travel. So
And what is
the
it? Because I know there are people who love cruising, but what is it about train? I have my own, of course, experience and perspective, but I would love to hear from you.
certainly there's a number of reasons why I love train travel. Perhaps because I grew up taking a long distance train. My grandparents lived about 400 miles away, and I used to go visit them every summer, and I would take the train to visit them growing up. So I remember it from childhood. I always remember that journey, and that always signified, summer vacation and excitement and travel for me. But there's also something really, there's a certain romance to the train itself and that way of traveling for a few different reasons. one of which is you really get to see and experience where you're going, and how far that journey is, and what kind of territory and terrain lies between you. You know, when you fly somewhere, you don't have any sense of the distance you're covering, and the sort of changes that happen in the landscape between where you've coming from and where you're going. With a train, you physically experience that through time, and I really like that. The other interesting thing I think about a lot of long distance train rides is nobody takes the train. Nobody takes the train because it's fast or efficient or even inexpensive. Right? If you really want to get somewhere quickly and inexpensively, you're going to fly. You're going to take a budget airline and fly for the most part.
Most part,
Uh,
yeah.
this the sort of journeys that the train trip that you and I met on, Manoj, that's a it's a destination unto itself. I mean, that's not inexpensive. Some of these long distance trains, the around the United States, they are the experience. I mean, when you travel, and a lot of people think that Amtrak is they're just low class commuter trains, but that's really not the case. Some of these we met on the Empire Builder, which is one of Amtrak's signature lines. And when you pay for sleeper class, you're also getting access to a dining car. You have 3 meals a day, linen table service. Someone's preparing your meals made to order. You get wine at night. You have access to an observation car. You have a cabin attendant. I mean, it is an experience unto itself. And because no one takes the train because it's efficient or cheap, that automatically makes most people who ride these trains interesting. And
Yes.
this is how we met. So one of my key tips, if you're going to take a long distance train ride like this on it's one of these experiences that are in sleeper class, most dining cars have multiple seatings because of course the dining car cannot accommodate all the sleeping passengers in one go. So they have a timed seating. So you'll have a reservation for your meals, specifically dinner. I always take the last seating because then I don't have to leave. I'm not being pushed to leave to clear the car for the next seating. And that was how we got into such an amazing conversation because we were in the last
That's
dinner
a very
seating.
good tip. Very good tip.
And then we ended up closing down the place. We talked for
Yes,
like three
yes.
hours. It was
We even
great.
became friends with the crew, and they started telling their stories. And that's the two things I like about train. And you're absolutely right. The landscape changed from Illinois to Seattle every few hundred miles. In India, actually, not only landscape, language changes, clothing
Yes.
changes, food changes, and you learn so much about it. And second is you meet so many people who you learn so many stories. You connect, you talk about yourself, you learn about them, and it's an adventure, it's an experience, and I also enjoy it. I really like it, the train journeys. And you're right, I mean, when flight, you just see, you're thousands of feet on above ground, and it's just, yeah, you did faster, but you didn't experience the whole thing between A to B. So
And
yeah,
you don't meet people. I mean, you
yes,
may get to talk to the person sitting beside you, but it's cramped and forced. And I mean,
yes,
we had the run of the dining car by the end, and
yes,
we had the
yes,
luxury of time. The luxury of
yes,
time to chat, and then we saw each other the next morning, and we took
yes,
pictures in that little station, and then we
yes.
ran into each other again in Seattle as we took the next train to Portland together. I mean, that was so
Correct.
special.
I
So
know, I know. That's, yeah, yeah. I agree with you. So let me come to the earlier book. Was it earlier or after the train tips, where you wrote about how to travel for free? Uh, I would, rather than focusing on that particular book, I would like you to give us, as a going away gift, some of the travel tips, and then you of course will have a checklist as well. But give us something which we can take away with us, and will actually apply and use. I know one of the things we talked about was also how to use the sims in different country. First thing you do is try to find a local sim, so you doesn't cost you much in international calls. So give us some tips. Thanks.
Well, that's a great tip right off the top. Is certainly if you're going to buy a local SIM card, and there's a few things that you need to do. First of all, you need to make sure that your phone is unlocked, in that it is not tied to a carrier in your home country. If you bought your phone without actually paying the full amount of the phone, you're paying for it every month in a phone contract. So you need to be out of that contract so you can unlock your phone. That gives you the ability to put in a SIM card from another country, which gives you a local phone number and data, which is fabulous and very inexpensive. The place to buy those SIM cards is almost always the airport. Before you leave the airport is the time to get those SIM cards. You might think most things that you buy in an airport are too expensive. But the interesting thing about getting your SIM card at the airport is they are set up to outfit foreigners with SIM cards. Because once you leave the airport, if you go to a regular store, and I actually had this challenge in India, because in India, if you land in New Delhi, they'll give you a SIM card at the airport, no problem, and they'll set you up. They'll open up your phone and do all the settings, do the thing they need to do. Boom, it's yours. But I didn't have time. I was transiting through to Jaipur, and then I had to go somewhere else, so I couldn't get that SIM card in New Delhi. And that meant that when I was in Jaipur, I had to go into a Vodafone store. They didn't know how to set up. I mean, I had to jump through all kinds of hoops to try to get a SIM card, because normally someone who buys a SIM card at a regular cell phone store is going to have a local residence card, and you need that to register for the SIM card. So get it at the airport. They'll set you up right away with it. They know how to do it, and it'll be as inexpensive as it can be, and it'll be the best time saver you can imagine. So there's a hot tip right there.
Good, good, good. So now, do you want to talk about your list? You wanted to, yeah. Let's talk about that.
I wanted to offer everybody here a free gift as thanks for hanging in for this little chat that we've had today. And the gift is a free checklist of 10 things to do before you travel long term. So if you are considering hitting the road for a while with your work or as an early retiree, no matter how you hit the road, if you're hitting the road for a little longer than a little amount of time, you're definitely going to want this checklist, because this will help you cover the bases of the things that you need to think about in order to travel effectively, to travel stress-free, and to not hit every bump on the learning curve like I did. So things like that phone tip, things like how to get your mail, different ways to get accommodation, lots of things to think about. Packing lists. Oh, I love a good packing list. I could talk about packing tools till the cows come home. So lots of different things. So definitely check out your free checklist as a great thanks for joining in on this fun little chat that we've had.
And why don't you now talk about your own books and your website and where to go and what they can find? And so tell us more about it.
All right. Well, my online home is theprofessionalhobo.com, and that is where you will basically you'll find all my social channels. You'll find the links to my YouTube channel with my remote work and travel show, and much more. And on there, you will also find the 2 books that I've written. One of which is called How to Get Free Accommodation Around the World. I talk about 5 different forms of free accommodation. I saved over $100,000 in my first 10 years of full-time travel by getting my accommodation for free, with the added benefit that I had way more rewarding a cultural experience than I ever possibly could have had just by staying in hotels. I met people that I would never have met if I was just on the tourist track. And I was able to save all this money and get my accommodation for free. So in this book, I go through the 5 forms of free accommodation, and I show you how to get those gigs, how to stay safe, and how to make sure that they will be complementary to your lifestyle and your travel goals. And my other book is called Tales of Trains, Where the Journey is the Destination, where I talk about some of the crazy train trips I've done through 11 different countries in about 44 days. Not only the Ultimate Train Challenge, which you talked about a little bit earlier, but also some amazing and crazy train rides I did on Australia, including an 11,000 kilometer trip in 11 days, all to see if it was possible to get bored on a train. I think because I wrote a book, it's safe to say I didn't get bored.
Yes, interesting. Thank you so much, Nora, for your time. It was really love to talk to you, connect again, and we'll remain in touch. And I want to wish all our audience today a very, very warm Thanksgiving holidays here in US. And like I always say, do you want to have a last anything you want to say before we round up, Nora? You want to have a message for the audience?
Well, my message is to you, Manoj, and I'm really hoping that we get another chance to meet on a train. I'll tell you what, I'm planning another trip. I'm hoping in the beginning of March, I'm going to go from Portland to Sacramento to Chicago to New Orleans. And that's going to cover all the rest of the trains that I didn't do the first time when I circumnavigated the States. So you let me
Wow,
know
I
if I'm going to
really,
see you on one of these trains.
I love to. Yeah. Good luck and all the best on that. And, like I always say in the end, life is short, have fun and have no regrets. And again, thank you so much. Thank you, Nora. And I'll take good care of yourself. And goodbye, namaste, and adios. And we'll meet again, hopefully. And goodbye. Good night.